Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and in this video I will be explaining to you the concept of a React higher order component. Now before we look at that, we first need to understand what a higher order function is. So the term higher order function comes from functional programming, and it essentially refers to a function which takes in a function and returns a function. So for example, let's look at this example here. We have a function which we'll call createAdder or something like that. And then inside of here, we'll do add by, and then number plus add by. Now, you might not understand how the syntax works, but essentially what it is the function createAdder, this will return a new function. This will return this function here, but then add by will be equal to 3. So then what I can do is I can do something like const add3 equals createAdder3, and then this is a function. And then what I can do with this function is add 3, say 4, and we get the number 7. And the reason we get 7 is because add 3 is equal to this function here, and it's essentially taking in a number and returning a number plus add by, and we've defined add by here to be 3. So essentially we add 3 to any number given to it. For example, we could give it 10, and this would return us 13. So this is the concept of a higher order function. Essentially, it allows you to take in a function and return a function. Now let's talk about higher order components. So a higher order component is not in fact a component. It is a function that takes in a component and returns a component. The name is a little bit misleading, but that is how it works. Common examples of this include connect inside of React Redux. So import connect from React Redux. I'm sure you're familiar with this syntax here. Other examples include like Apollo as well. There's like with Apollo from React Apollo, I think it was. But anyways, now let's have a look at implementing our own higher order components over here in Code Sandbox. So I've got a very simple Code Sandbox setup here with just an app component. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component here on the page for rendering some dummy user information. So we're going to be using a JSON placeholder. So specifically, this is the data set I'm going to be using. So we're given back a user object containing the name, username, email, all this kind of stuff. And we're going to create a user component specifically for rendering this. So now what we're going to do is go here and let's create a new file here. So we're just going to create a file called user.js. Screw the directory structure. Let's just keep this one really simple. So import React from React like that. And let's do const user is equal to, and this will take in a user object. And what we will do is we will render a div, and the div will take the name up here, so user.name. And let's also render user.email. And let's see what else we can render here. Let's also render their username after their name. So let's do the user.username after it like that. So if we wanted to use this inside of our index, we would take something like this. We'd go into index here, and we would go get rid of these two lines, and we'd do something like import user from /user, and then we'd be able to use it here, like user is equal to, and we just need to specify the name, which we'll say is Lucas, and then we'll email, we'll say lucas@gmail.com, and the username is going to just be Lucas with a K, or something like that. And then if we save this, you'll notice that it renders that onto the page here, and we've got Lucas and then lucas@gmail.com, and we can put a BR here just to spread it out, and we've got that on the two separate lines. So now let's look at an example for rendering a specific user. So let's go into user.js here, and we have this which renders the user. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a higher order component. So actually, let's create a new file here again, and I'm going to call this one with current user.js. What we're going to do is we're going to write const with current user. This is going to take in any component. So we're just going to write component here, and we're going to return export default with current user like that. And the way this works is we are going to create a new component inside of here. So we might just call this one, like say, const new component. And then we'll write a functional component here. And then this will just return component like that. And we can do import React from React. Now you'll notice that given what the code that we have here, and let's just return new component here. And you'll notice that given this code, what we're actually doing is we are returning new component, which means that we're taking in a component and returning a component. However, we're not passing in any of the props. So what we can do here is write props inside of here, and we can do ... props to pass through all the props. So now if you do this, then there is absolutely no point in having this code, because we take in a component and we return the exact same component with the exact same props. However, the reason that we do this is because then we can also pass in a user prop with some additional configuration here. So let me show you what I mean here. We could do something like, for example, import Axios from Axios, for example, and then we might do a use state here as well. So then we might do something like const user, or I guess user set user is equal to use state null, and then we might have an effect inside of here. So like use effect, and then we might do axios.get, and let's just put in, say, this URL here. And we might want to get this URL for the user, and then do .then, and then the response, and we're going to do set user response.data. So this might be what we do, and then we might go into here and we might do component user is equal to user like that. And we might actually put this one after the spread, just to make sure that we always have the current user prop being passed through. So now we have with current user, which takes the original component and returns a new component. And inside of it, we also pass in the user prop. So this way we can put information onto the component. So one case in which you might want to do this is instead of just fetching this user from a particular API, you might be looking to fetch the current user from the session. For example, you might have integration with Redux in your code. You might have integration with another library. You might be working with local storage, cookies, and whatnot. Then this type of code will allow you to take your component and essentially inject in a new prop, which allows you to add information to it. So this is something we can do using a higher order component. Now let's go into index.js and let's just create something here. So we'll do import user from user, and let's do import with current user from / with current user here as well. So now that we've got that, what we're going to do is we're going to write const current user is equal to with current user like that. And instead of writing user here, we're going to write current user, and we're going to save this. And with current user, what we're going to do is if user is equal to null, or if we can't find it, then we will return loading. So we'll just show the words loading here. Obviously, you can imagine you can make this more complicated. We're going to add Axios as a dependency as well, because I'm using that as an HTTP client. So now that we've done that, it should just be able to compile. So now you see it says loading, and then it shows the name of the person, so Leanne Graham. So now this is working just fine, but let's look at changing this higher order component a little bit so that we can actually accept some new props in as well. So instead of doing current user, we're going to rename this so that we can do with user ID. So with user ID.js, and we're going to grab this name here, and then we're going to rename this to with user ID, and we are going to rename this to with user ID as well. So the way this is going to work is before we had to pass in a user prop, but now what we're going to do is we're going to go here and we're going to essentially take in a user ID prop specifically for fetching a particular user. So the way we do that is we do user ID here like that, and then we get the rest of the props as a spread, and then we would do user ID inside of here, put backticks here of course, and then what we do is we pass in the rest of the props, and then user ID will become user. So now that we've got that and we've changed it to with user ID, we change this here to say specific user, or I don't know what you would call this one here. And then we do user ID is equal to say 1. So then something like this will be able to fetch you the first user, and then we can duplicate to also fetch the second user here as well. So this is an example of how a higher order component can also take in a certain prop and use it within the component. Now let's look at one final thing before we finish up. Let me just open this in a new window, make it a bit bigger. Right click on this, and then we are going to go over to components. So now you'll notice that the name of our component has become new component, which wraps around the user. Now this might not be what you want. In our case, it definitely isn't the best component name here. So what we're going to do is we're going to include a library called recompose. Now recompose is specifically a whole bunch of React utility functions and also higher order components as well. So you can use this one here, and we are going to go here. So we can use this one here, and then we're going to go here, and we're going to add that in. So we're going to go here, add dependency called recompose. We're going to add this in, and then inside of with user ID, we're going to include recompose. So let me just grab recompose here, and we specifically are going to do get display name. So this will do the name of the component, and then here, instead of calling it new component, we're going to go here and write new component dot display name is equal to, and then we're going to do with user ID, and then we're going to wrap it around the existing name of the component. So essentially it's with user ID, round brackets, and then the new component name. Now you don't have to write it like this, but we can write it like this, and that is how I'm going to write it. So now we're going to go here again, and you'll notice that it says user and with user ID like that. So this is a special styling formatting based on this name here that we've given. But if we chose to do a different name syntax, then you'll notice that that exact syntax that we use, so with user ID hyphen and all that, will appear right here. So that is how you can change the name of your component. And it definitely does come in handy if you are building a higher order component, especially one that you might expect other people to use. So that was an introduction to higher order components inside of React. A final note here is that I actually don't use higher order components that much anymore. And the reason for that is because if we go back to the Recompose library here as well, the creator Andrew Clark, he himself says as well that hooks solves all the problems that we attempt to address with Recompose. Now, Recompose itself contains a whole bunch of higher order components. However, given the evolution of React, higher order components generally aren't even the best solution anymore for the largest majority of problems. So we will be having a look at using hooks to replace higher order components and to do other different React patterns in later videos. But I still wanted you to know about higher order components because I think they are still incredibly important to know about. This has been Lucas with Better Coding Academy, and see you guys later.